I even have some lights. Vicious.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Yeah, Professor Wu is joining us directly from my WeChat with her. And welcome everyone joining us to this webinar by Fortuna Society. And we are really glad to have all of you here. And because today we will be exploring a very exciting topic. It is directly related to Macau's future development, and we are privileged to have a very experienced journalist, Mr. Jose Carlos Matias, to talk to us about a very important topic, Macau as a people-to-people hub for China's relations with the Portuguese-speaking world. Well, I would say Mr. Matias is one of the most suitable people speaking about this topic in Macau because he has very rich experience in journalism in Macau. He arrived in Macau several years after Macau's handover to the PRC, and he has held many positions in Macau's various media agencies like TDM and also Chinese Portuguese bilingual media performer. And recently he has been appointed the CEO of Macau News Agency, which include the very famous Macau Business magazine. And Jose also has some experience in academia, particularly with the University of St. Joseph in Macau, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and also recently he has some teaching commitment at the University of Macau in the fields of journalism, European studies, or international relations. So the stage is yours, Jose. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction.
I'm Davis, today's chair, who I also work briefly as a journalist in Chinese and English media in Macau, and I'm interested in diplomacy and also Macau's link with a Portuguese-speaking country in Africa. So it's my real honor and privilege, and I'm really glad to be able to have these conversations with Jose and all the friends who are with us on Zoom.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Davies. My great pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Wu Mei and Fortuna Society, for this very kind invitation. It's my honor, and it's really great that there's interest in this topic. So all of us can look into reflect and looking into what's been achieved and analyze the role of Macau in an area which might be somewhat, until recently perhaps, was not so much on the radar, was pretty much under the radar, but I guess it has gained steam over the years. So thanks a lot. I will first of all welcome you all and tell you how especially meaningful it is for me to be here with you, Professor Wu Mei, with Davis, Yip, with all the participants. I hope it will be a fruitful and interesting journey in the coming minutes. And first of all, I'd like to tell you a bit of my story, because my own kind of biography is somewhat related, or to a great extent related, to this topic. Davis was in the intro pointing out that I arrived in Macau after the 1999 handover, after the retrocession of Macau to the People's Republic of China. I arrived in 2003. Actually, I feel, and I'm convinced, that was really a fortunate coincidence. When I arrived, it was in the midst of the SARS crisis. I guess many of you do remember how it used to be. And actually, in 2003, it was just before the once in a lifetime transformation that we witnessed in the city with the opening of the new foreign owned casinos as a result of the liberalization of the gaming industry. In 2004, we had Sands opening, and then everything changed with the opening of the other integrated resorts and casino resorts, and we know what happened since then. But in that same year, 2003, something else took place, which was obviously not equally transformational at first glance, but was of pivotal importance for the international image of Macau, which was the establishment of the Forum for Economic and Trade Cooperation between China and the Portuguese-speaking countries, an initiative of the Ministry of Commerce, the central government, which decided or launched this initiative, having Macau as the headquarters of this newly established mechanism, a multilateral mechanism for cooperation, 2003. So I remember quite well, I had just arrived. I was back then a frontline reporter working for Radio Macau, which is the public service broadcaster of Macau in Portuguese language. And those were really exciting times when everything was back then taking place. So it was really, really interesting. So throughout this talk, I will be kind of, you will be coming across someone who at the same time has experienced as a journalist some of these events, or many of these events, especially like the high level conferences with ministers and prime ministers from China and Portuguese speaking countries as a reporter, but also then afterwards trying to look at it as an analyst and in a kind of scholarly fashion. So I will be sharing with you a mix of both, of my hat as a journalist and my kind of hat. I wouldn't consider myself a scholar, but I would say that I do have a lot of interest in international relations and in the external relations of cities, of provinces. So that's one of the beauty of this topic. So let me get started by sharing with you my PowerPoint presentation. So the topic is okay. Oh, here we are. I guess we're okay. You can get a glimpse of what we're talking about. Macau is a people-to-people hub for China's relations with the Portuguese-speaking countries. I've been exploring this kind of relationship over the years. There are multiple dimensions. I will be addressing some of these dimensions with an emphasis on people-to-people linkages, because I truly believe that it is kind of underrated, the relevance of what's been going on over these past couple of decades. One could even argue over the centuries in the case of Macau. So here we have at the heart of these dynamics, of course, the People's Republic of China and the Special Administrative Region of Macau, and the 8 Portuguese-speaking countries. What do they share in common? Alongside Macau, these 8 countries, they were once part of the former Portuguese Empire. They also share Portuguese as an official language. They share similarities in terms of the legal system and the centuries-old history of connection through trade, through personal interactions, cultural interactions, with, of course, the history, which was at times a bit complicated, but as a whole, and in the case of Macau, Macau has been to a great extent over the centuries hub for East meets West, and also specifically for interaction between the Portuguese-speaking world and China and East Asia and Southeast Asia. So I will be talking about some key concepts that I believe are important to frame the question. Frame the question in the sense of, it's a bit of in terms of a bit of political science approach and international relations approach. So the first concept is soft power. It is a buzzword. so I'll be using it somewhat loosely, but I guess we kind of have a common understanding of what soft power is despite one being able to dispute some of the assumptions. Then I'll move on to external relations and of NCGs, which is non-central governments. How cities, provinces, and regions play a role in a country's foreign policy. Not foreign policy in the strict sense, but in a broad sense, in terms of the external actorness of a country through cities. Then specifically, we will briefly look into Macau's external space before and after the handover, but mostly after the handover. Then we will talk about this unique mechanism, which is pivotal for the development of all these dynamics, which is the Forum Macau, the Forum for Economic and Trade Cooperation between China and the Portuguese-speaking countries headquartered in Macau. And then the two key structural in recent years policies or strategies which have been also important and have been playing a role in reframing somewhat the role of Macau in China's relations with the Portuguese-speaking countries. The Belt and Road Initiative, which I would argue kind of reframed somewhat Macau's external activeness alongside the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area and the role which is assigned to Macau, which is related also to this linkage with the Portuguese-speaking countries. So if we look at, let's kind of, I'd say, try and, hold on a second, okay. Okay, now I've got some space. When we're talking about soft power, of course, soft power, as some of you may be aware, was a term coined by American scholar Joseph Nye Jr. Kind of what can we say about soft power? Is the ability to influence other countries' behavior, to shape what others want, without using hard or coercive power. And he argued that the soft power of a country rests on three main resources: culture, political values, and foreign policies. Obviously, I would like to make the case for a need to make adjustments when we're dealing with these concepts and applying to China's overall external activeness due to the unique features of China. However, I think it's interesting and it's doable to place and to make use of this concept, but we need to hook it up with other key ideas or concepts which are at play here. One is this idea of nation-place branding. Basically, it's how a nation, and I would say nation-place, because in the case of Macau is China's Macau or China through Macau, because there's an organic relation in the interaction and interplay between the overall national foreign policy of the People's Republic of China and the role played by the SAR in this respect. So that's why I say nation-place branding. It can be a tool to develop a country's soft power. It regards the way the nation or a nation as a whole presents and represents itself to other places. So in the same thread, Mead was arguing that the projection of a nation's economic success can attract other states to believe that its increasing influence is desirable, inevitable, or perhaps permanent. Another key concept is public diplomacy. Here we draw from Ying Fan's approach. While public diplomacy here is a subset of nation branding, which focuses on the political brand of a nation, it's of course how a nation, in this case, a nation basic place, of course, as a whole reshapes international opinions. And of course, a successful campaign will help create a more favorable and lasting image among international audience, further enhancing a country's soft power. So coupled with this, we have this idea of charm offensive. So coming back, revisiting the basics of the difference between hard power and soft power. So hard power, coercive force, military means, economic means, and soft power with these resources, and also Joshua Kurlantz's approach to charm offensive, where he included aid and investment. But I think there's, of course, something missing here, which is the importance and the role played by certain actors, and we will talk about that. But let's first address the issue at the institutional level. Whereas hard power rests basically and primarily in the hands of central governments, the tools, non-central governments, let's say cities, provinces, regions, are platforms for soft power projection. And it's going beyond this. And then here we are talking about a more of a multi-centric world approach, in line with James Rosenau was talking about some 3 to 4 decades ago already, which of course taking into account other actors other than nation states, be it through central governments, but of course beyond local governments, but way beyond private actors, multinationals, and non-governmental organizations and different bodies. So this is a much more diverse picture than the very classical realist and state-centric and state-obsessed approach to what international interactions is all about. So I'm not only talking about international relations, but much, much broader what we're talking about here. Of course, a very more stark way of putting things is that no matter which soft or power is about the power of attraction. But it's got to be in a way that will be, to be successful, that will be perceived as mutually beneficial. And that's, of course, one of the challenges here. And this is something that has been projected also through Macau. So let's make the case for non-central governments as suitable platforms for soft power. All in all, well, hard power strategies, like the ones we were talking about, are primarily in the domain of central governments. Well, soft power strategies, which can be devised by central governments, obviously, can be also the outcome of a top-down approach, but one can say that sub-state units, local governments, alongside other non-governmental actors, business people or NGOs or associations, are suitable platforms. Why? Because they don't engage in balance of power politics directly. They don't have military goals. And normally they're signs of innovation in terms of urbanism, culture. So they are in a privileged position to play this role. So this is a conceptual case. So regional governments have, over the recent decades, emerged as international actors. They are negotiating and signing international agreements. Of course, it depends on the arrangement between the local governments or the regional governments and the central governments, the division of labor. We will be looking into that in the case of Macau in a while, because it's within the framework of one country, two systems. They have conducted trade missions and seeking foreign investment, and entered into some multilateral, bilateral relations with states. We have different cases, of course, it can be very diverse, because we have the cases, of course, of federated states, or we have the cases of confederacies, but we also have the cases of unitary states, where a certain region or a city does play, these kind of roles. So it's pretty diverse. I would not, one of the concepts developed in the early 1980s was this paradiplomacy. I do not totally buy into it. I would rather look at, if we're talking about diplomacy, at multi-layered diplomacy. But anyway, or something else. But anyway, it is a useful concept because these authors were looking at what Quebec was doing, what Flanders was doing, what Catalonia was doing. There's a big difference though here when you're talking about the external relations of a place like Macau, which is the fact that contrary to these cases that I was mentioning, the case of Macau is not a case of tension between the periphery and the center, but of complementarity in an authorized autonomy, in an interplay between what is assigned to the central government and what can be conducted by the SAR government, the regional government. So that will be something that we'll be addressing. Now, when you're talking about the efficiency and the intensity and the quality of what a city or a region can do or can play, we can look at the variables of intensity and quality. And that depends on two main vectors according to Aguirre's studies: the material and formal conditions and the economic and social and political and cultural conditions. Let's say, for instance, these conditions can be addressed as follows. So the material conditions are basically like infrastructure. Say, for instance, the fact that we have in Macau an international airport, which was a big thing back then. Remember when, well, the airport was launched or opened in the mid 1990s, 1995, by 1995, but it was projected in the 1980s, and it was not was a challenging endeavor because obviously we already have other airports in the vicinity. Right? International airports, you have several, right? Already some, but the fact that also as a result of the good relations between Lisbon and Beijing, between Portugal and the People's Republic of China, and this kind of accommodation and dialogue that presided over Sino-Portuguese relations, especially after 1979, after the establishment of diplomatic relations, and all of this did play a key role in allowing and equipping Macau to have some of these conditions. And actually, I would make the case for Macau's distinctive role being positively impacted what we call path dependence, or path dependency sometimes, you know, has a pejorative approach. I would look at that in the sense of the path that took us to 1999 help us explain and understand the special role assigned by Beijing to Macau. Now, material conditions, of course, ports, airports, highways, natural resources, we don't have many, as we know, capital investment, human resources, etc. Then we have the formal conditions. When we're talking about the formal conditions, it's like the authority formally assigned by the center or the central government to the local government, whether it's a hybrid approach or a clear-cut approach. And here, I would say that we have a mixed picture where we should not or could not make the case for an entirely clear-cut division of labor, but there's some, of course, the gray areas. However, and then in practice, things have evolved in a way that is not so complicated, I would say. So when we're looking, so whether there's ambiguity or not, all of these might be necessary, but not sufficient to assess that, because we have to take into account the social, economic, cultural, and political dimensions, which actually also change over time. Are we talking about this? This has to do with the political culture. It has to do with the political economy of a place, whether we have an economy which is like open or an economy which is more rent-seeking. And here we have the not so good news about Macau, which is over, and we need to also, again, understand what was the colonial model in order to understand what we have now, but also the size of the city, which is based on concessions, on oligopolies, or monopolies or oligopolies. There was a model. And actually this meant that we have a business elite which is still to a great extent, you know, engaged and indulging, I would even say, into rent-seeking activities. So it's not so much outward-looking and not necessarily too competitive. And this poses an issue and a challenge while looking forward, as I will be addressing when we're talking about the regional integration process in the Greater Bay Area. So there's a need for change in this respect. So this is to assess the intensity and quality. Let's take a look at the routes at this highway, right? So, and look at things now kind of summing up where we are in the conceptual approach. So we can look at things in a way that is, there's a central route where you have national governments, okay? So these are national governments. Then you have a peripheral route in parallel, I would say, with the non-central governments, okay? Another way of looking at things is like you have national governments, non-central governments, and the fact of the matter is that what we have as like they're not riding along different diplomatic routes, but rather along the same route, although in a different car. This is according to a Dutch scholar. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I would suggest or presume that it's Pluim, I'd say.
Sounds right.
Sounds right, right? You know, there is. Okay, and I would even go further. The things can be even more nuanced. In the same car, who's driving? Who's taking the back seat? Sometimes, you know, it might be the city car, but the one who's, you know, on the wheel may be someone from the central government, and then other, you know, local government people are in the backseat, or the other way around. Things can be pretty nuanced because it's not so like black and white. But anyway, the point and the fact here, or the main point here, is us to have a much more nuanced approach when we're talking about, well, I'm using the word diplomacy, but I prefer to use external relations, as I will be making the case. So, according to this model, we have central governments more, you know, in the realm of hard power. Then soft power can be the domain of both, but non-central governments, cities and provinces, in a dynamics of you know, nation, place, branding, projects, of course, foreign policies, political values, and culture. We will be highlighting culture here because my view is that despite the name, let's talk about the forum, we will be addressing it as a forum, the Macau Forum for Economic and Trade Cooperation between China and Portuguese speaking countries. The main added value is the unwritten one, which is culture and people-to-people linkages, my view. So now let's look into the one country, two systems model of external space of the SAR. This is similar to what we have in Hong Kong, or basically the same. In this respect, is the same actually. So we're talking about the authorized external space of Macau, sorry for the typo there. The central government, of course, Article 13 lays out and spells out what is in the realm of the central government related to foreign affairs. We have, of course, the Foreign Affairs Commissioner's Office here. And the Central People's Government authorizes the Macau SAR to conduct relevant external affairs on its own in accordance with this law. So, of course, I mean, as we know, the model of one country, two systems is based on the concept of authorized autonomy, right? The authorized autonomy also applies to what is authorized, of course, in the field of external relations. But of course, here, as we know, there's a, the foreign affairs vis-a-vis external relations. It is something that is not necessarily, there's no, as I was saying, the boundary can be pretty blurred. So as the one country, two systems experiment has been proven over the years, it's the practice that will then tell us, you know, the sort of dynamics that we've got between the central authorities and the representatives and the local players. Basically, conceptually, the agency that the city has in this respect. But as I said, in the case of Macau, as is not the case of whatsoever any conflictual or tension between, in terms of external affairs, between the SAR's perspective, I think, and the central government's one, it is a rather smooth situation, but it's still very interesting to analyze how it evolved. So when we're talking about external relations, take a note of what is mentioned there in green. Okay, using the name Macau, China may maintain and develop relations and conclude and implement agreements with foreign states and regions and relevant international organizations in the appropriate fields. Appropriate fields. Let's take a look at the wording here. In the appropriate fields, including, meaning
but not limited to.
Not limited to, that's right, Davis, including economic, trade, financial and monetary, shipping, communications, tourism, culture, science and technology, and sports fields. This is all about the main platforms for soft power and for what is the added value of a city. So that's why I think there's a very interesting, is entirely compatible the case that, that we can make. Now, external relations and the basic law, these are the relevant articles, as we know, issuing own passport, having own immigration controls, having visa abolition agreements, establishing trade missions in foreign countries. Now, this is an issue, right? We are talking about the ECO, the Economic and Trade, the ETOs, I'm sorry, Economic and Trade Offices. In the case of Macau, and this is something that could be regarded by some as a bit of a disappointment that the economic and trade offices have not expanded over the years. They're basically, with the exception of Taipei and then Beijing, or Beijing first and then Taipei, they're basically the same that were here in the very beginning, which are the SAR, or in the handover, which are the Economic and Trade Office in Lisbon, the Economic and Trade Office in Brussels with the European Union, and one in with the
Geneva
with the World Trade Organization. I guess, as I will point out in my suggestions, I will make the case, of course, for an articulated expansion under the leadership and coordination of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also of the Ministry of Commerce of the central government. There's so much potential, especially in terms of Portuguese-speaking countries, and there'll be so many interesting things to be carried out, I would say. Anyway, I will go and address that in a while. Again, of course, these are all the relevant articles. This now relates to Hong Kong, where you see Hong Kong is Macau in this case. So this is the same. So when we're talking about external autonomy and what could be, you know, the gray areas, back in 2002, Miguel Santos Neves wrote about this. This is a figure, or this is some sort of chart, I would say, based on what he wrote in this article, where you have like white full autonomy more, and we have zero autonomy. The negative sphere is obviously defense and foreign affairs related issues. The restrictive autonomy and conditional autonomy are different levels of articulation, and the policy formulation is where there's more room for that. And of course, then the appropriate fields depends on where it's more political, less political. I remember when I was asking someone from, I shall not unveil the person's name, but it was someone, because was not to be on the record quoted, but the main idea, I believe I can share it with you, which was someone who was working in Davis, I'll need your help here in the External Relations and Protocol Office of.
Yeah.
I don't know. It changed. The name has been
Well,
undergo.
External Affairs and Public Relations and Protocol Office. I'm sure it's 90%.
Yes. Okay.
Accurate,
I should know this by heart. My bad.
Yeah, sure.
Directly under the Chief Executive's office. So how do you know whether a certain kind of issue is something that you can handle basically on your own by only having to, of course, always inform the representatives of Beijing in town, be it the liaison office or the Commissioner of Foreign Affairs, or something that you know that you need to articulate, or something that you know that you need to address for an authorization or for a green light or etc. Right? Because and one of the main criteria that he was sharing with me is whether it can be considered primarily political or non-political in terms of assessment. So of course, because this boils down to the issue of authorized external autonomy, right? And a wider issue, because one has to look at internal autonomy and external autonomy as two sides of the same coin in a way, right? So it was really interesting because that somehow shed a little bit of light on the question that was kind of lingering on in my mind back then. So moving forward, we have let's talk about the Portuguese-speaking world. I guess many of you are familiar with this. It is the geography, the geopolitics of Portuguese-speaking countries. So as I was saying, what do they share? Of course, countries plus the SAR. What do they share? Well, they share, of course, the fact they have a common history, something in common in the past, but also in the present and in the future. Portuguese as an official language, there were territories of the former Portuguese Empire. And as Macau was under Portuguese administration for over 400 years, over the centuries, there's been interaction between Macau and China, be it officially or non-officially, formally or informally, and these territories, business people from these territories. This has been the case over the centuries, and interestingly, in the run-up to the handover, especially in the 1990s, when you had the transition period, when you had the joint liaison group between Lisbon and Beijing, agreeing on key moves, on key policies, the Macau Portuguese authorities back then did make some moves in bringing Macau closer to these Portuguese-speaking countries. Of course, let's set Portugal aside for obvious reasons. Of course, there was an umbilical relation for administration's sake, but I'm talking about the other territories. One of the very interesting moves was carried out by the then Macau Municipal City Council at the city-to-city level, by Macau joining an international organization of cities, of former and current capitals of capital cities of countries or provinces in Portuguese-speaking countries, UCCLA, which is still an organization of which Macau is a member. Also, a number of sister city agreements were forged back then, which is interesting. Not only between, actually, these sister city agreements were forged, of course, between Macau and several cities in these Portuguese-speaking countries, but also, even before the handover, Macau was already playing somehow a role in bringing some mainland cities closer, or at least in and paving the way for sister city agreements. Why is this important? Because this is, when I look at the Greater Bay Area, this is where I can see a lot of potential for further development in terms of city-to-city relations and linkages. When you're talking about city-to-city, you're talking about, of course, people-to-people also, cultures, and in addition to institutions and businesses, of course, which is a key driver in all this. But anyway, when you look at the geography of Portuguese-speaking countries, you can see that it is primarily Atlantic Ocean oriented. It is very, very interesting that we can see that the main economic powerhouses in the Southern Atlantic region, okay, let's put South Africa aside now, because South Africa is in the intersection between the Atlantic, Southern Atlantic and Southern Indian Ocean. They are Portuguese-speaking countries, Brazil and Angola. Also, if you look at the heart, where is the heart of the Atlantic Ocean? I would say it's in Cape Verde, right? And of course, the pluricontinental dimension, which includes Latin America, of course, Africa, Southeast Asia in the case of East Timor, and Portugal, which is, of course, a member of the European Union. There are many, many good reasons for Macau to have a stake here and China to be very, very keen on developing all these linkages back then. So when you kind of look at the initial, I don't know if you can see the, okay, if you look at the initial Belt and Road, or would say One Belt, One Road corridors, and the first maps, I mean, those were put forth by 2014, 2015, etc. And if you overlap these two maps, and then of course, as we know, the Belt and Road Initiative, the scope was further way expanded. But if you overlap these maps, basically the Portuguese-speaking countries' geography gives a kind of a way global clout or dimension to the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So there's no, so the encompassment of China, Portuguese-speaking countries' relations and the role of Macau in the Belt and Road Initiative was something that seemed really logical. And then it's a natural step. It makes a whole lot of sense. And we know, as we know, let's say, for instance, in the case of Portugal, Portugal is alongside Italy, one of the very few, or if not only, Western European countries which formally joined BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And it is no secret that Portugal would be considered fairly one of the most China-friendly countries in Western Europe. And there are many reasons for that, of course, but the centuries-old historical relation and also the smooth handover of Macau and what happened since then, it is, of course, help us understand that. This is not to say there are not, how to say, non-coincidental values or non-coincidental interests, because it's international relations is all about that. But there's a great deal of, in terms of common ground, this one can argue this is what has been prevailing. Let's see what happens from now on with the ongoing turbulence in world affairs. We will also be very briefly addressing that. So the Belt and Road Initiative, the blueprint put forth by the National Development Reform Commission back in 2015, you can see that would enable China to further expand and deepen its opening up through mutually beneficial cooperation with countries in Asia, Europe, and Africa, and the rest of the world, right? And interestingly, some of the aims, when you look at that, it is, okay, I guess, investment facilitation, enhanced trade, infrastructure development, etc. And I would look at what is highlighted, I would say, here, which is enhanced cultural exchanges, encourage different civilizations to learn from each other. Of course, here we can see already the subtext of of um, uh, the community of shared destiny for mankind, which has different ways of, translated into English, but is that key concept that's been it is credited to President Xi Jinping. Sorry. So when we're talking about the cooperation priorities, okay, in BRI, policy coordination, facilities connectivity, trade, financial integration, and people-to-people bonds might be a bit kind of an overrated dynamics here, but that's what the one that we're more interested in. Also, when we talk about the cooperation mechanisms, in addition to bilateral cooperation, take note of this, multilateral cooperation mechanisms. Okay, we have a number of them, which are where China plays an important role. Some of them were actually launched by China. Some authors talk about China-led multilateral endeavors here. And I would say that, as the Forum Macau, despite not being mentioned in the plan or in the blueprint, could easily be included here. International forums and exhibitions and platforms could be regarded as at the same time as a multilateral cooperation mechanism, but also as a platform in the likes of these forums, right? Cultural diplomacy along the Belt and Road. Tim Winter makes the case for cultural tourism and heritage tourism. And guess what? Macau is a World Heritage City. Listed in UNESCO, just like a number of other, by the way, cities and locations and sites throughout the Portuguese-speaking world. So we can see here this proposal that this could provide a foundation for a more informal people-to-people connections, which lie at the heart of Silk Road tourism. And then this is when, in 16, in the last ministerial conference, which is akin to kind of the Forum Macau Summit, if you could say, when in the opening speech, Premier Li Keqiang was talking about the following, which is how the Belt and Road Initiative is highly compatible with the development plans of many Portuguese-speaking countries, right? So it was officially, this was when officially BRI became a sort of, when the Forum Macau and Macau's relations in Portuguese-speaking countries were actually encompassed officially, I would say, in the Belt and Road Initiative. So, so this speech is surely important. I had that we were supposed to be having the ministerial conference of the Forum Macau was initially scheduled for last year, but because of the change of government in Macau, also the 20th anniversary of the SAR and all of that, then it was postponed for this year. But as you know, COVID-19 had the massive impact and everything had to be postponed. In this case, sine die. We don't know when we'll have the conference. There were high expectations and the cooperation mechanisms were supposed to be expanded. Let's see what happens. There's surely a number of questions moving large as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that the pandemic is having all over the world and in some Portuguese-speaking countries, unfortunately, in a serious way. Brazil is a concern, but the situation in Portugal is not very good either. And in the African Portuguese-speaking countries, they're struggling because of their shortage of resources. China has been playing a role, especially in helping Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa and also East Timor. Then, we have Belt and Road Initiative getting steam, and shortly after there was, while it was taking shape, but it was, if I'm not mistaken, in the National People's Congress plenary session of 2017 that Li Keqiang, while addressing the delegates during the Lianghui, when he elaborated a bit or talked about more about the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, right? So we know we are all familiar with this, right? We've been coming across the geography of GBA. Now, what's really interesting is I'll go back to those slides. The fact that like later in the year and especially in 2018, it became clear that the role of Macau as a connector with Portuguese-speaking countries would be an added value, not only an added value, but actually a key asset for Macau's roles in the Greater Bay Area. We can see here, this is mentioned in a crystal clear fashion by then Chief Executive Choi Sang-yon, by then Secretary for Economy and Finance Lionel Leung, and in fact, the Lionel Leung said Macau's strong network of overseas Chinese, particularly in terms of their links with either the mainland, Portuguese-speaking countries, European countries other than Portugal, or member states of ASEAN, talking about the role of Macau. This was in the Boao Forum in 2018. And then when Choi Sang-yon visited the 9 mainland cities of the Greater Bay Area, this was also highlighted. And now it is still pretty much ranking high. If you look at, I will share with you an article as an outcome of the current chief executives, the new chief executives visit to Hainan very recently, and this was again featured. Now, when we look at the, when in 2019, February, we had the outline development plan of the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area out. The Portuguese-speaking countries' connection was actually highlighted a number of times in the plan. So as you know, we have, I will try, I dare not to try to say it in Chinese. Davies, you'll correct me. So it will be 一个中心. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if I should say 一个平台, no? Is it right?
Yeah, you don't need 个. Is alright.
一平台, and then the base, 基.
D.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I always, Cantonese comes first. Well, we know what one base is a base for a cultural exchange in a diverse cultural environment, having Chinese as a mainstream culture to spread and to promote cultural exchanges. In that respect, we have the one center of World Tourism and Leisure Hub and one platform for economic and trade linkages between China and Portuguese-speaking countries, and of course in the Greater Bay Area context. You have a number of goals, and actually if you just try and find Control app, Portuguese in the plan, in the blueprint linked to Macau, Portuguese as or Lusophone related to Portuguese speaking, or Lusophone, you have a number of references, right? And even, the link Macau to promote the internationalization of the renminbi and linking it, as an R&D clearing center for Lusophone countries, and also a very important establishing a training base for bilingual talents proficient in Chinese and Portuguese as a key direction. So it became clear that Macau's one of Macau's main roles in the Greater Bay Area project was to connect, be facilitated in the linkage between mostly the 9 mainland Guangdong mainland cities in the Greater Bay Area, and the Portuguese-speaking countries, and the Portuguese-speaking markets, and the Portuguese-speaking cities. And again, is this new? Well, not entirely new. I remember quite well because every year there's so many events, and I mean, in the pre-COVID world, of course. there were all these trade delegations organized by the Macau government, the Forum Macau, when they would take a delegation of officials and business people to Portuguese-speaking countries once a year. And I wouldn't say since the beginning, but shortly after the Macau, these trade missions were initiated, you always had a delegation of a city from business people from Guangdong province, from the Pearl River, right?
Jose. Yeah, I know. And there will be also several questions about the Greater Bay Area. Maybe you can elaborate more during our now Q&A sessions, and perhaps you can have a very brief conclusion for us. Yeah.
Of course, surely. As for the different festivals and events, there's so many, really, so many. But just show you some of them. We have every year the Cultural Festival, Festa da Lusofonia. We have musicians and artists from Portuguese-speaking countries every year coming to Macau. And in 2006, we have a very interesting event, the Portuguese-speaking countries games, Lusofonia Games, our own version of the Commonwealth Games. And Macau was the host of the first edition of these games, bringing together the Olympic committees of Portuguese-speaking countries. Okay, so this is something more recent, of ties not only like beyond the Greater Bay Area.
Sure.
Here is a diagram of the linkage and the interplay between Portuguese-speaking countries, Macau, China, Greater Bay Area, and the Belt and Road Initiative. And now I'm going to wrap it up very quickly with strengths and shortcomings and questions looming large. So historical relations with Portuguese-speaking countries is an asset. Macau's legal system, Portuguese-based, is an asset because it's something that shares in common with the Portuguese-speaking world, the official language, the overseas transnational networks of Macanese communities, the many events organized, and this is an opportunity to diversify in a moderate way, surely, the Macau economy. But there are some limitations. In my research and the research that I've been involved, I've come across this kind of self-restrained external actor. Also, we've come across some half-hearted commitment by some top officials. It's not so much of a priority. Sometimes it sounded a bit like lip service, but then not much was going on. Things have improved, by the way, over the past 6 years in this respect. There's been an interesting leap forward. Coordinated effort. Sometimes we can see a lack of coordinated effort, shortage of skilled human resources bilingual. You can see in the Greater Bay Area plan that is an important issue to be addressed. Macau is a magnet, so has been because of the gaming fortune. Let's see what happens from here on, whether there will be a need to go abroad. The business interests of the local business elite has not been so much aligned with China's business interests overall in the Portuguese-speaking country.
They're local based.
And there's an expectations capability gap. People were expecting so much, but then maybe what can be delivered is limited. Lingering questions. Okay, so very quickly, and I'll finish here. The interplay between the Belt and Road initiatives and the wider geopolitics of China Portuguese-speaking countries' relations, the reorientation of Macau and the Forum Macau to serve this purpose. Macau as an interface between GBA and Portuguese-speaking countries' cities. Macau's ability to play a relevant role as a soft power people-to-people cultural platform. The limits of China's soft power and the Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, the post-COVID world. And we cannot escape from the elephant in the room, right? The US-China trade war, the pressure that the United States and Washington has been piling up on Portugal and Brazil due to the close ties that Portugal and Brazil have in terms of political and also business ties with China. And also, let me tell you, also Angola. So some Portuguese-speaking countries have become a sort of, I wouldn't say battleground for US-China, influence, but to some extent, yes, because in the eyes of the United States, all these dynamics over the past couple of decades have, brought Portuguese-speaking countries really close to China. They were already had good relations. And let's say, for instance, São Tomé and Príncipe, which is an island country in Africa, Portuguese-speaking country, some 3 years ago, in late 2016, dropped his diplomatic ties with Taipei to return to Beijing. So this was actually, I would say, one of the outcomes, more significant political outcomes of all these dynamics, which was, São Tomé cutting ties with Taipei. There's so many more questions, but I think I better stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Thank you for most inspiring, taking us through all those important topics about Macau and its relations with Portuguese-speaking countries, especially under the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative and the Greater Bay Area Cooperation. Just, I just have a very quick questions for you. Is that you mentioned there must be some materialistic conditions as a which are required in any development of external relations, right? And particularly about human resources. What sorts of human resources do you think Macau is lacking to prevent it from going further in making use of its potentials? Because over the past 1 or 2 decades, we focus on training Chinese Portuguese translators. Actually, they went to university to study Portuguese for 4 years, but it seems that this kind of professionals may not be all we need in order to make a step further. Do you agree?
Entirely, I fully subscribe what you just said. Obviously, having and again, I have to highlight this. When I mentioned that it doesn't seem sufficient to be what was done, this is not to say that what was carried out was something of depth, in the sense that the number of people studying Portuguese has increased substantially, to the extent that nowadays in local schools, in local non-tertiary educations, you have more. I'm talking about in Macau. We have more pupils learning Portuguese than you had in 1998, 1999.
That's tricky, right?
Yeah, it's really, and there's been a lot of promotion of Portuguese language by the authorities, and also by the local regional authorities and by the mainland authorities. And the number now, of course, this is COVID situation, but in the pre-COVID situation, you had about, if I'm not mistaken, over 200, if it's not 300, local tertiary education students of Macau studying in Portugal, alongside more from mainland China. So in terms of in that respect, there has been an improvement. But the thing is that maybe you need to go beyond, because you need to have skilled manpower with knowledge of Portuguese-speaking countries' markets, and also of Greater Bay Area markets, in order to perform the role of middlemen, of intermediaries, providing services, consultancy services. So Macau would have, in this respect, the conditions should have to have the best, not only, I mean, services for companies, for businesses, and actually this is where it could form some critical mass here, which would go beyond something that we understand, which is the fact that if you learn Portuguese and if you are relatively proficient in Portuguese, you get some good chance of getting a job in the government, which is great, of course. But we need more of an entrepreneurial, kind of bilingual talent with a focus on different markets, and also can provide consultancy services of top level for mainland companies willing to invest and trade and do business with the Portuguese-speaking countries. And now with the Greater Bay Area, that's a very interesting opportunity that you have. On the other way around as well, because as consumption markets for Portuguese, Brazilian, or Angolan companies, surely if they, but you need to create that need, right? You need to create that. You need, it's something that I think, well, you cannot be dictated, but it makes sense. But then you need a market to play its role and have favorable policies in that respect. These are some examples. I also believe that, you know, yes, there's been a lot of progress in terms of education, but in terms of R&D, you know, scientific cooperation, surely there's a lot to be done. And of course, you know, you have, namely in Brazil, but also in Portugal, in the fields of science and technology, of creative industries, you have people who could be attracted to come to settle here and to then be able to have mobility in the Greater Bay Area to transfer knowledge, technology, which I think would be highly beneficial to Macau and to China as a whole, especially to Guangdong. And of course, this is always a two-way street, but you have new generations with you know, a lot of ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the final question is that Macau, we talk about people to people exchange, right? But the fact is that Macau has no people in, not officially in any Portuguese speaking country except Portugal in Lisbon, right? And because in short, we don't have any official presence there. And in your view, what should be done, and if some sort of agencies or offices are set up in Portuguese speaking countries, surely they need a clear positioning. What should they be positioning themselves?
Well, it's I'd say maybe I could, if you allow me, I could show. Hold on a second. Whoa. Oh, okay.
It's okay. Maybe you can just give us your thoughts.
Yes. Okay, so because I think it would be interesting, I guess I will address some of these questions, or some also your previous question here, when I say the way forward, right? There's going even way beyond the forum's name, which is for economic and trade cooperation, having more people that you've been having, but strengthening that role, have an improved coordination between the forum secretariat and the Macau government, better cross-departmental effort, expand the network we were talking about of VTOs to all Portuguese-speaking countries, maybe a bit too ambitious, but I think there could be a case for this. They could help China's relations with the Portuguese-speaking countries. As I said, because Macau has a sort of Janus face, right? It's China's Macau, and Macau is surely a friendly place of China for Portuguese-speaking countries. Make better use of historic and municipal ties. And in fact, let's say, for instance, let me give you an example. You have in the cooperation between China and a number of African countries, the Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, infrastructure development, right? Roads, hospitals, universities.
And telecommunication, right? And telecommunication,
right? But you see but let's say at a more community level, if you have a library, a public library in a small town with the name of Macau, China, you know, or let's say some infrastructure, social infrastructure, you know, financed by Macau with the name Macau, China, I think that would be a great tool and very interesting to, you know, win the hearts and minds of the local communities. I think that could be interesting. Not only think about big business, you know, think deeper. Okay, bolder educational policies. I talked about R&D. I talked about developing Macau as a hub for Portuguese-speaking countries' market expertise. Something important has been touted, Macau as a center for commercial arbitration between entrepreneurs from China and Portuguese-speaking countries. And let me tell you this, I think Macau does need to open the door to more bilingual and more talents with expertise from mainland China to come into Macau not to replace the locals, don't get me wrong. My point is not that. I think we should focus on nurturing local talents in this respect, but to supplement the needs that you may have to have a critical mass and a pool. So I think there should be more skilled people from mainland China, more skilled people from Portuguese-speaking countries, not only Portugal. You have very talented people in Cabo Verde, in Brazil. They would be very happy, I'm sure, to come to Macau if things go right in the future. So I think there's a lot of plenty of ideas.
Yeah, Jose, and recently 5G has been a very free battleground between China and US in there. Like they are trying to have their urging more and more countries joining them on their side in terms of 5G technology and infrastructure. And I know that many developing countries, including those in the Portuguese-speaking world, are also needing this kind of upgrade of telecommunication infrastructure. So do you think Macau can play some sort of a role in China's 5G going out strategy?
Well, that's a very interesting question, right? Well, as you know, well, in terms of 5G, Portugal, there was a memorandum of understanding, which was inked in late 2018 when President Xi Jinping visited Portugal, between Huawei and the owner of Portugal's top telecom company, PT, for the development of the 5G network. We've learned recently that it was not a governmental decision, but it was a decision, as it was portrayed, by the company or by the operators, not to have Huawei developing their 5G network. Well, I've learned, and this is no secret, that the United States pile a lot of pressure, and we're really unhappy with with the results of Xi Jinping's visit in late 2018. And in fact, even a top official from the Federal Communications Commission was in Lisbon in February 2019, and the American embassy in Lisbon also. This was public. And this was before what we've witnessed over the past 12 months, over the past even more intensively since January, February, in terms of the US-China trade tech war, so to say, and all of that. So. But at the same time, you see in Africa, in Angola, there are some interesting developments, and I can see that Huawei and 5G, they do have room to be adopted there and to play a role there. But in Portugal, in Brazil, there's a political and a dimension, and of course, as you know, Portugal is a member of NATO.
Sure.
So I think the balancing act, I would say, of the Lisbon government will be to keep on trying and attracting more Chinese investment for sure, but it will have to be more selective. And actually, remember also that Portugal is a member of the European Union, and the European Union is preparing additional vetting mechanisms for foreign investment in what they call strategic areas, and also from state-owned companies or investors that they consider that would have a link with states. Of course, they don't mention in this necessarily the name China, but it's written all over indirectly in the subtext. At the same time, there is some good news in this respect coming before the end of the year. If we do have the EU-China investment treaty completed, so I think there's a sort of grand bargaining taking place nowadays. What could be the role of Macau? Well, I think Macau as a success story of one country, two systems is really important that it is indeed a success story. Also, not only for, of course, for China, but also for Portugal's approach to Macau, because and the situation nowadays is more complex, as you know, uh, as a result of the troubles, the situation in Hong Kong and the tensions and the way all of this is politicized and the equation for Lisbon is becoming more demanding, I shall say. But as far as I know, in terms of the what is substantial and essential, nothing really substantial has changed. But um, when it comes to 5G and Huawei and other areas, surely cooperation will have its limitations. Not necessarily because the Portuguese government it's because the Portuguese government will have no other way other than that due to what's at stake in the transatlantic relations and at the European Union level.
Okay, but I'm sure perhaps in individual capacity, perhaps Macau locals perhaps as members of mainland Chinese telecommunication giants may actually help those companies going to other Portuguese-speaking countries in individual capacity as Portuguese-speaking Chinese people. I'm sure that human and human connection still count in this increasingly politicized world, right? And we need a breakthrough. China need a breakthrough there, and Macau maybe as Macau people may be the key to make this breakthrough. And
something. Yeah. So sorry to interrupt you, Davis, because I think what you're saying is really important. I think we can make the case for the potential for Macau in such a polarized overall situation. Macau has a great potential because through Macau, economic agents, which do not have the label of state-owned companies, right? But can play a role in investment, in cultural exchanges, and can actually play a role in what is a huge challenge that we have before us. We have to resist the disastrous prospect of a sort of so-called new trade war. We have to resist intellectually, culturally, and by what we do on a daily basis, by building and promoting an epistemic community of good people, kind-hearted people, focused on peace, development, and prosperity. And Macau could be all about that because of our history, because of the stability that we have here, because of all the potential that we have here and the compatibility that we have here in Macau as China's Macau.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. And to conclude, and like Jose said, multiculturalism is really important, and that's also what our society is committed to promote. And we aim to, as you know, we have members from academia and also various professional fields, and we aim to become, actually, as Jose said, a important base for multiculturalism and also cooperations across countries and regions for education, academic exchange. So we will continue to have webinars, seminars, and other inspiring sessions to intellectually and for all of you. And we thank you for all of your participation, and we look forward to your continued support. Thank you again, Jose. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Professor May. Thank you, Davis, and thank you for Fortune Society and all of you who joined us. Thank you. Good evening.
Okay. Thank you, and see you next time.
Hello.
And Professor Wu. Yeah.
Hello. Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
David, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. See you.